Hey, yeah, what? Grab your bootstraps, yeah, let's scale your growth. Here's the truth, Jack. We'll reach the globe, unveil the notes.
What the
pivot, earn your digits, won't burn, you'll get it. See, this is factual. Funds will show, learn to flow with Candid Capital.
This is a Candid Capital interview. In these episodes, we host industry business professionals involved in the global tech ecosystem to discuss various topics related to tech, global economy, and building sustainable businesses and investments. Welcome back to the Candid Capital Podcast. We are having a sunnier episode than usual as we are recording from the Southern Hemisphere in Sao Paulo, Brazil, hence the sunnier shirt. This episode will cover the Brazilian tech ecosystem with one of the industry's influential voices. She's a futurist and tech market specialist in the investment banking industry here in Brazil, Julia De Luca. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this conversation. I had my first visit in 2023 in May at the Rio Web Summit. And I was just here exploring the market, and every single person is, you got to follow Julia. You got to follow Julia.
I'm happy it's going global. It's actually my first podcast that I'm doing in English, I think. Yes.
Yeah, because I'm trying to map it, and every VC, every startup person is like, oh, have you heard of Julia? And do you follow her newsletter? I'm like, no. And so that's kind of how I heard about you. And I had to reach out since I was going to be in Brazil for holiday. I'm like, why don't we do it?
I'm happy you did.
So as I like to start all these off, I would like to know the origin story. How did you get into tech and investment?
All right. So I'm an economist, and I started my career actually in a very traditional firm called Gávea Investimentos based in Rio. It's actually a hedge fund private equity, and I was sales and investor relations. But right after that, so I spent 5 years there. Right after that, I wanted to do an MBA, but I had a personal issue. I wasn't able to go. And then I stopped, and I was like, you know what? I was going to stop for 2 years and spend a lot of money on my education. Why not try out something completely different? So that's when I went to Stone, which today is a publicly traded company at NASDAQ. It's an acquirer and has software ecosystem, etc. But at the time it was smaller. It was 2017 and not public, obviously. So I decided to go to Stone. And this was, I would say, like my first clash with what is tech and how would you work with developers, etc. Because in finance, I'm sure that you know, and some of our listeners as well, it's very straightforward. If it's a bank or a small asset manager, it's like computers and you and the investors, etc., the analysts, and that's it, right? And I saw myself in this firm that had tech in its DNA, with like several areas and very complex. And I was at the same time afraid, but also very intrigued I wanted to learn everything. It was very interesting. So after a year and a half, and I did a bit of M&A. So this was how my networking started. So back in 2017, things were starting off here in Latin America. Of course, I already had Mercado Livre as a listed company, but when you look at the private sector technology, it was starting off. And the fact that I did M&A for the first 6 months of my job was very interesting because I got to know the today founders of unicorns starting out at the time, because we were looking for companies to buy in adjacent markets of Stone, but they were smaller, right? So I started putting my head out and doing my network in tech. And right after that at Stone, which is also relevant, I was the business lead for their product that's a checking account called Conta Stone. But basically what that role was important for me It was right when the Brazilian central bank was starting to put out all of the regulations on fomenting competition here in the country. So you could be a payment institution and not a financial institution, thus not having all of the burden of being a bank, but operating as a fintech. So it was right when the central bank was doing all of these movements. So as I was the business lead of the checking account, I went to the Brazilian Central Bank in Brasilia. I followed closely all of the developments, the start of open banking, etc. So it became a topic that I learned a lot during that piece of the job. And at the end, the company was preparing to go public. And I started out the investor relations team, like working on the F1 of the company, lawyers, exchanges. So it was very interesting. I say that it's like a year and a half that might represent 7, like dog years, you know. And then right after that, I joined Itaú, which I am today for around 5 years and a half. And I work at the investment banking department covering technology, both companies and the funds globally.
So have you gotten to work on some of those companies as they were going through their exits as unicorns?
Yes. So I think that's when you look at the ecosystem in Brazil, given what we've seen, that more difficult environment globally in 2022, given interest rates, etc., the same happened in Latin America. So several of these unicorns that would be listed already, like an exit as an IPO, they are holding on in order for markets to improve. But I did work with them on M&As, right? Because we do equity capital markets and also M&As in private placement rounds. So we recently advised the company called Gringo in their raise of $30 million. So it was interesting that I get to see again a lot of the people that I met back in 2017, and I maintained the relationship. And I think that this was very important for, I would say, like, to reach a status of being like influential, because if you know everyone, you talk to everyone, you get all of the information, you know what's happening. And I think that in tech, I think in every aspect, but in tech, it's really important to know what's happening. So
is that kind of how you got into doing the newsletter and kind of a lot of the content around the ecosystem?
So the story of the newsletter is interesting because it was the middle of the pandemic. And what was happening here in Latin America, I think in the world as well, but like every day we had at least like 2 rounds happening and being announced, and it was crazy. And I'm very anxious, and I have a hard time when I'm not keeping up with what I need to keep up, right? So I was struggling a lot with like everything that's happening. I had to read everything, etc. And I decided to do personally, like a procedure that I do every day until today, which I read like the main news pieces of news that I follow during the morning as soon as I arrive at work. But I don't have time to read all of the article in its integrity, right? So I would like save the link in a Word document. And on Sunday, which is the day that I'm starting to think about the week, I usually read through all of them and thought about them, etc. And after, I don't know, 1 month doing this, I was running one day and I was like, you know what? I think that my procedure is interesting for other people, because I'm sure that there are several people in the market that is trying to understand what's happening in Latin America, or even Brazilians that want to keep up with tech that are not able to, given the overflow of information. And I looked at what existed as for newsletters, and focused in tech in Latin America, there wasn't any newsletter at the time. I think today there's only one. So I was like, you know, I studied in American school, so I've always written better in English than in Portuguese. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to write it in English so everyone can understand, and maybe it's going to become something, I don't know, big. But I started from my personal email. So I selected 30 people that I thought would like this type of information. And I sent them in like blind copy. And at the end of the email, I would put, if you want to forward this, feel free to. And if you want to include any email on the distribution list, I'm going to send this weekly. And after, I don't know, 8 months into it, I got like to 1,000 emails on my blind copy. People started to like forward it a lot and like it a lot. And that's when I went to Substack, and then at Substack, it escalated.
Oh, interesting. So with all that information, because I'm in the same kind of boat, because I'm an analyst, and so I have to follow a lot of information, which is why you're also on my list for Latin America. It just seems so cluttered with information. So, how are you managing? I mean, if you're able to share that, or if you have some sort of secret AI tool.
No.
It seems like a lot to cover even one large market as large as Brazil is.
Yes, I think so. The newsletter, it's a big job. I say that to commit yourself to do something on a weekly basis is very, I don't know, I would say heavy in a sense. So it takes a lot of time. But I think that part of the reason that people like it and read it and recommend it is what I decide to put there as major news. So it's exactly what you said, like how to figure out what's noise and what matters. And this is where my day-to-day job comes in. Since I'm responsible for the coverage of these investors globally, and I also sit with several founders when they're deciding what to do, I know like what's the hot theme, what's something that matters and versus something that's not very hot right now. So I think that this is the secret sauce of the newsletter. Like I'm able to read several I would say portals, right, and select what I think that is relevant. So I would not be able to do it with AI. And everyone asks me, like, I'm sure you use something to select all the news. No, I do it because I also like a lot to read and to select. I think it's part of my learning curve. So I joke with everyone that there's not a work dinner or lunch or conversation that something mentions a piece of news that's relevant that I don't know, because chances are I have read it, and I have reproduced it in the newsletter. Of course, I use ChatGPT for like the text and like the writing, but and sometimes Jasper. But which news am I going to publish is something that's mine.
Okay, that's wow. That is a lot of reading,
Yes.
for sure. So with on the investment side, so are you technology agnostic? Like, do you cover and look at sort of startups and what they're developing in investment in all areas, such as SaaS and also deep tech, maybe? Like, is it the whole spectrum?
So I am part of the TMT team within the investment banking at Itaú BBA. At the bank, we are separated by the different sectors, right? So I'm responsible for the coverage of companies that are marketplaces, but I sit together with the person that covers fintech, that covers SaaS, and I think that because of the newsletter as well, I have to understand several of the verticals, despite the fact that I don't cover that company in specific. So I would say that Julia is agnostic in general, and I do have more feelings for fintech. But in my day-to-day job, I cover the marketplaces.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely something that's very obvious in Brazil, is really the whole fintech and everything fintech related.
Yes.
So maybe that answers my next question, which was, there was a particular vertical that you were watching closely and that you think is going to be interesting area of development over the next year.
So I think that there are two, right? I think that fintech is definitely a sector that we always have to be on the lookout, because there are important headwinds, external headwinds that make the sector evolve in a pace that's different than all of the others. But I also think that SaaS is a B2B in particular is a big concept for the region looking ahead. And when we look at fintech, I also think that the fintechs dedicated to businesses will be the next wave. Why? Because we had a pandemic that forced all of the individuals to do everything online. So if you feared, I don't know, transferring money or doing, I don't know, buying stuff with a high ticket online, etc., you had to do it with the pandemic, right? So what happened, what we see in the tech sector in general, and I could say for Latin America, is that the B2C side evolved a lot because the consumer became someone that is tech savvy, right? But when we look at the businesses, it's a bit behind. So I think that softwares for these businesses to make their lives more tech as well, and fintech opportunities for these businesses are going to be the next big thing.
So I'd say that we're kind of watching some of the similar things, because I look at a lot of SaaS, B2B. That's kind of what my major focus is in. And so coming to Brazil last year, and again, I don't entirely know, and I think the audience would probably want to know the same thing, is where is SaaS B2B? Is it like super early? Is it kind of like right before it's going to take off? Like, where do you think it's at? And do you think the industry here is kind of on board to start pushing it further along?
If you had asked me the same question 2 years ago, I would say it's super early. But now I think that we're starting to see big companies gaining traction and starting to be sizable, right? And at the same time, the maturity of the companies is also following through. So I would say we are more of like intermediate. I think that it's interesting. I don't know how this is in the US, but it's interesting that we joke that like the biggest threat to like an ERP for an SMB here in Brazil is like the paper and pen, right? So it's like there's a very interesting there's a very interesting scene that happens to me all the time. Is like I'm running at the beach in Rio, and I get to a stand and I pay for my água de coco using my Pix. So I don't have the credit card on me. I don't use my Apple Pay. So I use something very technical. And then the guy who is serving the água de coco, he writes in a paper like a 1 or I don't know, 10, whatever, like the number that he's selling. And he gives it to me. So like, it's very interesting where you can, and this in this situation, you can see exactly what I was saying in your last question, like how the consumer is very futuristic while the businesses aren't. Of course, I'm extrapolating to something that's really small, but I think that now with like the software is getting more, like more and more companies using it, and other companies telling other companies to use it as well. So I think that we're, I would say, in an intermediate stage.
So then would you say it's fair to say that maybe the digital transformation curve is just beginning?
No.
The B2B?
I know.
If for small businesses,
I would say in the middle. Okay. I would say in the middle of a digital transformation.
Because it seems like logistics, e-commerce, and fintech seem to be like much further ahead or advanced. At least that's yes. Agree.
I agree. But now, even more with AI, I think that there are several solutions that the companies will want to have. So I think that this this SaaS thing will start picking up.
And are you seeing a lot more foreign investors coming in
Yes.
because they're recognizing this as an opportunity as well?
Yes. So it's very interesting. So there's also like taking a step back and looking at the global spectrum. What these big funds that are based in the US or in Europe, they have like a certain allocation to what they're going to invest in emerging markets, right? So who are the emerging markets? Brazil, India, China, Russia, and Southeast Asia, right? What we saw at the bank, and what I firmly believe is that when you look at all of these places, China is very complex right now, given what's happening on the regulation standpoint and how the government is interfering in investments. So recently, I'm sure you and the readers know that they started to, like Sequoia needed to separate their China business from their US business, etc. So it's becoming complex to invest there. When you look at India, there was like an overflow of investments in the recent past. What we hear from funds is that it's actually very complex to operate. I'm not saying that Latin America is not complex, but I'm saying that they have already invested. And I heard like a very emblematic phrase from an investor that was the following. He said, Julia, India is easy to get money in, but very hard to get money out. So they're reaching this conclusion. So there's another place that maybe not that investable right now. And Southeast Asia, it's obviously affected by China a lot, and Russia, of course, of what's happening. So almost like by elimination, Latin America became a hot spot and a place to go. And when you look at the stock exchange as well, like multiples, etc., we are really cheap. So we're having like an interest of foreign investors like I've never seen before. Like U.S. funds opening offices here or hiring locally, etc. Because I think that everyone wants to, also because as the U.S. becomes more and more mature, is much harder to get alpha there, right? So they want other countries to experience high growth. So I think that foreign investors are looking a lot at the region.
Are you seeing very many foreign tech companies trying to enter the market here to sell products? Because that's another issue with some of the regions that you've spoke, because some of the products that you build in your home country doesn't necessarily transfer to all markets.
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple of examples, right? Latin America is hard. Brazil is hard. Like we always say that there's the jeitinho brasileiro, which is like in free translation would be like the Brazilian way that you do stuff, right? And for the foreign companies, like it's an emblematic example was when Walmart tried to operate here and went away because they weren't able to operate here. Amazon now is very good, but in the beginning when they came, they also struggled a bit. And when you look at like the big fintechs, for example, N26 started operations here, but they have already left. But now we saw recently the acquisition of Pismo by Visa. So it's a way of entering the local market. So I think that the companies, they know it's complex, and that the way to start their operation here is partnering with someone local or buying a local company. So what I think is going to happen next year is like more deals similar to what happened to Visa and Pismo, because this is the way that the companies will enter.
So as I see, it's kind of, from my point of view, an advanced fintech market. Do you see Brazilian fintech companies expanding into non-Latin American regions, just because the technology is quite advanced here, I would say, and your support from regulation to be able to have the flexibility to operate in other markets.
Yes. So there's a recent trend of like the internationalization of Brazilian-born or Mexican-born, Latin American-born companies. We saw it recently with VTEX. VTEX listed in the US and has an important operation now in the US. But what we're seeing on the earlier side is like founders actually like moving to San Francisco and starting their businesses there. Like a good example that I always mention is a company called Incognia. André Ferraz, who is the founder, he moved to the Valley, and his solution works in Latin America as well, but it also works very well in the US. So I mean, as a with the objective of increasing the addressable market, he started the company there. And we're seeing like there's another example of a company called GGB that also. So I think that it's less related to like a regulatory point of like it's easy to operate outside, more related to an addressable market. So companies want to get bigger and get a bigger scale. Of course, Brazil is important and Latin America is important, but it's like this compared, like very small compared to the US. So it's a natural trend as the ecosystem develops.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're based in Canada, so you know, in order for your company to really take off quite large, you have to find a way into, you know, the US. But when it comes to fintech, even if you're bringing it into Canada, there's usually, I would say, technical barriers.
Yes.
Versus the technology itself and how it could work with the market, which I think is quite interesting that there's a company that's found the fit that they can make it work in the US.
I agree. So just to your point, I think that the US has a big addressable market, but from a regulatory standpoint, when you look at fintech, they are way behind. So maybe these companies are trying to bring what we're doing like well here in Brazil on the fintech side to the US. I think there's still a long way to go. But I'm sure that like with FedNow, et cetera, everyone is watching what's happening.
And I would agree with that. I mean, in terms of Canada, and again, this is just my opinion, but we are great at R&D. We are great at deep tech and building technology, but we don't really build it into our everyday lives. And so if you have ever been there or if you visit there,
Never.
you will notice that it's just like, why are we still doing things this way? And you know, it's an older market,
Mm-hmm.
and it's extremely obvious if you like spend time in like Korea or China or one of those places, and then you come back to Canada,
Mm-hmm.
because the amount of embedded technology, it's not as much as you would expect considering the type of tech companies that come out of it. And again, I think this is much like the US market. There's a cultural component, but there's also, I think, technical barriers that kind of make it hard to kind of crack those legacy industries that are kind of operating on kind of the old system.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So in terms of the tech areas, you mentioned the two that you're covering, but what technology has you the most excited right now?
It's everyone is going to answer the same thing, which is AI. I think that like 2023 was the year that it was the year of like AI, and then 2024 will be the year of like actual adoption, right? By the companies and by the people. I still get very impressed with the stuff that the different language models can do. And I think that we will face an important like shift in every aspect of our lives when it becomes even more mainstream, right? So I know that everyone must answer this, but I think it's AI.
So hopefully I haven't said this on too many podcasts, but I am the opposite side of this.
Really?
I find AI incredibly boring.
Really?
And I am not interested in it at all. I like the tools. I use the utility tools.
Uh-huh.
I think it was 2018 was the last time AI was hyped up.
Uh-huh.
And we have to have a different thing every year.
Uh-huh.
Like the tech market doesn't work if we're excited about the exact same thing.
Yes. Yes.
So I actually
we had Web3 recently.
So I think 2024 is going to be Web3. And,
really?
Yeah, and I think the reason it's going to be Web3 is because we have regulation doing the Bitcoin ETFs with the largest investment funds in the world. Goldman Sachs is looking at it. We got BlackRock, Grayscale. Yeah. We have all that happening. Now also Bitcoin is going to start making it possible to do layer 2 development like Ethereum. So I think this is going to be a Web3 year. If it's not this year, it'll be next year because the halving will happen somewhere around probably early Q2, late Q2, and then it takes the whole bull run to go with it. So there's those components, but I think the fact that we have central digital currencies coming out, and it's all related to Web3. So I think if we have to usually as an industry we change the hype cycle every year. And so we pick something else. What it'll be, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it was Web3 before. It was NFTs.
NFTs, yeah.
Right? Which would be like a subset. But I think this year it'll likely be something Web3, I think. And also because we also have just tokenization happening for different use cases. Again, coming out of the US. Which brings me back to Brazil. Because when I came here last year, I heard your central bank wants to tokenize the economy.
Yeah, we have a CBDC already in place called Real Digital or Drex. And they want to have like a state-owned CBDC. And I think that we have good companies here looking at this theme. So you mentioned the theme of the ETFs. There's a company called Hashdex, was the first company to list a Bitcoin ETF, and they've already done a Ethereum ETF as well. And they are, as we speak, looking at the regulation. As I spoke to them recently, looking at the regulation in the US, because from what I understand, next week should be an important date as to what's going to happen.
January 9th. The big day potentially.
So I'm well informed. But so I think that like we are looking at the theme, of course, much more like behind of what's happening in the US. But like to your point, I can see where you're coming from, and I agree that the industry every year has a new thing. So I remember that I went to South by Southwest in 2022. And everyone was speaking about Web3 and NFTs, etc. And then 2023, only artificial intelligence. Let's see what's going to come in 2024.
I mean, like these things don't disappear. They just have their cycles.
Yeah, they're hype, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the people really excited about AI, thinks that the development arc is going to be more exponential. Versus before, because I believe it was 2018 was the last time that AI was hyped, and maybe it won't be every 4-5 years, maybe it'll be shorter. But even at that time, it was all stuff that took a decade to develop, and then it came out. And I do think the utilities are interesting. I'm also an AI fatalist, so I don't think anything good will really come of it in the long term for society.
Really?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I think all the upside is just going to be in the short to medium term, and we're going to benefit from it and have all the enjoyment of it. But I think it's going to be like the social media.
It's an interesting.
It's going to be all great in the beginning, and it had lots of wonderful stuff, and then we find out 15 years later that it's really just bad for us. So I think a lot of that's going to happen, not just on a societal point of view. I think socially and culturally, it's bad. But I also think that if you just follow the money, like my thesis for everything is just follow the money. And so,
thesis.
like, if you just look at where all the money is coming from for it, where it's being sunk into, and what it's developing, it's mostly a certain type of industry that I won't mention, and that industry's job is not ideally, good things in the long term. So I'm a little bit more, I would say, cynical about AI, but I do think up front, in the small to medium term, it's all going to be great and nice. And we're not going to know till it's probably much, much later.
Yeah.
And just no way to regulate it globally.
No way. I think that we have a big problem on the regulation front. I agree. But I think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but maybe only on the short to medium term, like what artificial intelligence can do with like the amount of data that we have is something very powerful. So since I'm from a financial institution, right? And what I see is that, oh my God, we have like all of, I don't know, millions of Brazilians in our database, etc. If we run it by the right language model, we can extract and do like a specific offer for you, like very based on everything you do, all of your touch points with the bank, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's going to be very good for both for the financial institution in this example and for the individual. Like I can see where you're coming from on the skepticism of it all. Like it's true, like you don't know if someone is actually writing the book or if the AI is writing the book, right? So whatever. But I'm excited about it.
I mean, it's going to create productivity and efficiencies on a grand scale, definitely. And it's going to create early investment opportunities for sure. And, you have all these utility tools. I don't know what's going to do to SaaS. I think it's going to be problematic because every developer I talk to building SaaS tools is using ChatGPT to code.
Yes.
Or at least help them with the coding. So there's not only an IP thing to consider there, but also if the AI is making everything, where's SaaS? What's happening to SaaS?
Yeah.
So I mean that's another situation there. I mean, I think in the most optimistic scenario is that it ends up being like your cell phone tower. You don't even really aware of it until you don't get reception.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just going to be in the background doing stuff. I think that's probably the best outcome that could happen is if it has limiters on it and it just works in the background on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
That it powers, which is why it doesn't interest me because I view it as a future commodity.
It's an interesting view.
Whereas, different Web3 stuff I find interesting, philosophically as well. So I mean that's why that technology, yes, I'm biased. For sure I'm biased. On the interest of that. And also because I like the idea, like the applicable technology I find the most interesting is actually industrial metaverse. And
wow.
Yes. And it's a convergence of several technologies in tandem. So yes, there'd be AI, there'd be IoT, there'd be edge computing, there'd be 3D printing. But when you add all these things together, you can theoretically operate a manufacturing plant from your home with a computer. And all the large manufacturing, well, not all, but a lot of large manufacturing companies in Europe are using it, automotive, and services coming from telcos for different metaverse products. So like, that's the thing that excites me more for me. And I just see AI as just a component of that.
Yeah, it's a component. I agree. It's a component.
Because we have all this data for all this stuff, but what we're missing is spatial data. And so that's what the metaverse is really offering. Industrial metaverse, spatial data. And when you add that in with the other technologies, then you kind of have like the complete value chain potentially of whatever it is you're building. But anyways, I don't want to go off on a tangent because I could talk about Web3 all afternoon.
I can tell. I can tell. I think that for you too, I was talking with the founder of Hashtags about this, and with like my thing of trying to learn and know everything, and anxiety. He was like, Julia, For you to understand Web3, you have to study this every day because every day it changes every day. And I'm like, okay, I can't study every day, so I'm going to know only the surface, right? So I think I'm way behind you.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I mean, like, I don't really think you need to study everything. I think you just need to pick a couple use case verticals to grasp. But in Toronto, there's a group called the Blockchain Research Institute, and they have a partnership with the Brazilian group in Rio.
Really?
Which I just randomly learned about last, I think, a month and a half ago. And so there is some sort of connection between Canada and Brazil in blockchain development in R&D.
Interesting.
So there is an expert to point to somewhere in Rio. I don't know where their office is, but they are.
So this person that I'm mentioning in this company is based in Rio. You should talk to him. I'll connect you.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe he's the guy.
Yeah, maybe he's the one.
So when you're looking at startups and kind of looking at them in terms of their investability in Brazil, do you think there's any major difference than you would look at them versus other markets? Anything unique to Brazil? And, maybe tie it, your newsletter, you have a formula for sort of your spotlight of companies. So maybe it's relevant to that.
It's a good question. I think that given the different characteristics of the population, the economy, there are certain things that would work here that would not work globally, and vice versa, right? For example, the like law and the legal system in Brazil is very unique to the country. So there's a company, a founders fund invested called Jus Brasil, that's like digitalizing everything that we have of record of how do you say lawsuits, right? Lawsuits, and now they're creating a SaaS. This is I would say a specific case of something that works very well here and only here because the bottom line is that you have to have the information from here, right? To create it. But I don't know, the thing on the startups to watch and how I choose the companies, since they're very early, I always focus on the founder. I truly believe that a good founder can pivot the business forever and be able to navigate depending on what's happening. And a so-so founder with the best idea might not be able to deliver. So a lot of people ask me, like, Julia, why did you publish this company? I'm like, I liked the guy. Maybe his idea is not good for the startup itself, but I think that he's going to do something big eventually, So this is how I look at them.
Are founders in Brazil usually serial founders?
Yes.
Like, do they do multiple?
Yes, they do multiple. Yeah. And this is very tied to what we're living in, I would say, today as for the tech environment. So since Brazilians are serial founders and they learn from experience, we have I would say, older companies like Peixe Urbano. The guys that worked at Peixe Urbano, they are at their third company probably, or at their investment fund. And then when you look further, you have the guys that were at Nubank in the beginning. They've already left and they're doing something else. And this goes and goes and goes. So I think that with the third-time founder, fourth-time founder, you have the development of the ecosystem as a whole because everyone's learning, right, from their experiences.
And the other I was kind of wondering is there's a report that I read about some of the investments in seed and in Series A. I think Series A was the larger amount for Brazil, I think, for 2023. I might be getting it wrong in terms.
I think it's seed. It's early stage for sure.
Seeds are early stage. I can't remember. I might be mixing up deals with investment amount, but where would you say is the funding gap stage?
The funding gap is B and C for sure.
B and C.
Like the check, we have a big problem here, is that there's a lot of money for the early stage, and even more so when you consider the US guys and the European guys and whatever. When you look at the late stage, you also have these big funds that for the analyst to sit down and look at the company, it needs to be like a check of $100 million. And there's just a handful of companies that would absorb this size, but there are like several funds that do this type of check. You have a spot of like $30 million to $50 million. That's hard. So I think that the funding gap is like here.
And so do you think that funding gap is like kind of a result of the market itself, not just in Brazil, but globally? Or do you think that it's Brazil specific? Because the funding did kind of flee the later stages in other markets as well. And a lot more of it kind of just moved up the stages.
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple of phenomena. When we look globally, we see given what has happened in 2023, we see like these big funds also doubling down on the earlier stages rather than the late stage, because it's less of a capital commitment. And since they have their LPs like saying like slow down, it's like a good way to go. What happens in Brazil that I think it's specific for the country and for the industry as a whole is the fact that we have several local early stage funds. Several. There are a lot of funds that are looking to the early stage. And with the global guys, we have a good amount of funds looking at this check of like $100 million or 80 or something like that. And we do not have like a local guy or an US that's a fund that's active here doing the middle, right? So it's interesting that we have the conversations with the companies, and the company's like, I want to raise, I don't know, 20. I'm like, no, can you please go at least to 50? Because then we're going to access like all of but in this market that we are living right now, you don't want to do like a bigger round than what you can absorb, right? So there's something of the chicken and the egg as well. But I think it's part of the development of the market.
And so like for a foreign fund wanting to come into Brazil, they're coming in for early stage, but you need them to come in for later from
they are coming in an early stage. Like you have, for example, an Andreessen that's like only focused on, not only of course, but like more focused on like the earlier stages rather than a company that would be in the middle. And you have like the big firms, the GAs of the world, that are looking at the more mature. So yes.
Okay. And do you think that foreign money is vital to startups in Brazil to succeed?
Yes, vital. It's vital. And even more so when you get to the later stages. It's like, if you think about it, $100 million is more than 500 million BRL. So it's a very big check to absorb locally. And so I think that foreign investors are crucial.
So apart from, I guess, maybe the numbers, what do you see as the biggest barrier obstacle for foreign firms to come in and invest into companies here? So
there's this local flavor that a lot of investors have struggled in the past, and they're trying to bypass now. It's very hard to invest locally if you're sitting in San Francisco. Like, either you come a lot, either you know a local person that would know the founder that you're looking at, because again, there's the jeitinho, like the way of everything. So you could be looking at something that's like, I don't know, a scam, or it's so I think that the biggest barrier is like the local aspect because different, like in the US, it's okay if you're sitting in San Francisco and investing in a company from New York, like it's right. But in Brazil, I think given that the population has specific characteristics and Latin America in general, I think that the biggest challenge is like finding what would work locally. And of course, I'm not going to name, but you have like big, very good funds in the US. And then when you look at the investment that they chose in Brazil, I'm like, why? Because I'm from here. Right? So, I'm not seeing his view. Like, what did he see here? So it's interesting. Maybe he's seeing something I'm not seeing. I don't know. But anyways, so I think that this is an important point. So several of the good US funds that have done a very good job locally, such as QED, for example, they have local people. So this is important.
And so in terms of the domestic investment market, specifically, I'd say on the VC side and the angel side, do you think it's more in the infancy in Brazil, or do you think that it's also more mature? Like, for example, do high net worth individuals that are not in the tech sector kind of understand how to invest or how to get involved in funds, VC funds, and that sort of thing?
So I think that in the boom in 2021, 2020, a bit of 2022, all of the high net worth individuals started to invest in technology because it was like the next thing, right? VC and all of these companies announcing every day a new deal, blah, blah, blah. So they did invest. Now I'm seeing that they're taking a step back because they entered at the high, right? So, and now they're seeing what's happening to the funds. They're a bit skeptical. But I think that there's an interesting process that's happening is like the education of the people. So people are starting at least to like want to understand what's happening in tech. So, and you have like the ultra high net worth individuals, like at least trying to have an exposure to a VC fund, to learn from it, etc. You have family offices that have now fund of funds. So I think it's starting, and I think that it's similar to what you mentioned. Like it was very hyped in 2020, 2021, and a lot of people invested, but now a lot of people saw that the game is not that easy. So they are learning again, and then I think we're going to see a curve again to these alternative investments in the near future, I hope.
And so for the local or domestic VC funds here, do they view foreign funds coming in as sort of competitive, or is it more welcoming because there's more money and deals to kind of pass?
It's welcoming. It's welcoming. And if you want to like write a big check, having a foreign guy is important so that you can I don't know, do a co-lead and look at a deal. And since as I mentioned prior, since there are more early stage funds than late or later stage funds, the guy from the US might give an exit for the early stage, the seed round fund. So they actually see it with a lot of good eyes. Like they call the guys, oh, come see my companies, right? Because maybe I can have an exit. And
is there much corporate venture here? Like, are they getting more involved in
yes.
in it?
Yes, and this happened in 2023. More corporate venture capital being established and being invested. I would say that in 2022 this was not true, but now I don't know the figure exactly, but I know that they represented a significant, like historically was the biggest piece of like the venture investment ever locally, and I think that there's still a lot of room to grow. But
are they collaborative with the VC investors as well, or are they kind of more doing their own thing?
It depends, right? It goes on a case by case basis, but if like the intelligent way of doing it would be to collaborate, because if you are a corporate venture capital, and let's say if you are a corporate venture capital from a big retailer, and you invest in a SaaS business or whatever, chances are that the big retailer will be a client of the company that the fund invested. So why not the other funds see it with good eyes, because it's like an easier way for the company to get big clients. If you're specifically talking about corporate venture capital, I think that recently we had a shift in the mindsets. Like people, you usually saw CVCs as like, they're going to come in to do path to control, blah, blah, blah. Now they're actually seeing as something that's accretive to the ecosystem in general, and not necessarily an investment for control or anything like that.
And are they very much involved in accelerators and incubators, the corporate venture?
Yes.
Okay.
They're very involved. Very involved.
Cool. So now we're going to move on to my favorite part, or some people's favorite part of the podcast, and that is random questions.
Okay. Let's do
Or just
this.
concluding questions. So let's start with, what are you currently reading or listening to?
I'm currently reading the Elon Musk book, but I'm struggling because I think it's very detailed and I'm struggling to evolve. Listening, no, nothing specific recently.
And do you have any favorites or must reads that you think, if you're in this industry, or if it's just a random book that you think everybody should read?
Hard Things About Hard Things. I think it's a very good book, and you can apply it in even if you're not in tech, you're going to find, well, I think that you're going to find it interesting, and there's a lot of like, I don't know, cool lessons that you can apply to life.
Cool. What AI tools are you exploring or playing with?
Jasper and ChatGPT every day.
So what is Jasper?
Jasper is it's also an AI tool, but more like focused on writers. So it's like specific for a blog post, and writers in like marketing. So it has like different capabilities, but these are the two I would love to use more, but I don't have available time to explore.
Okay, cool. What productivity tool can you not live without?
So it's very interesting. Even though I'm involved in technology, for me, the productivity tool that works the best is the to-do list in my notebook. So it's true. Like every day when I arrive at the bank, I sit down and I write the date and I write everything that I need to do in no particular order. And then I number from 1 to whatever, given the priority. And I go like one by one. I'm very like methodical. So I think that it's a ridiculous answer, but I would say that like my to-do lists.
So is your to-do list using a software called To-Do Lists, or are you just using like an Excel sheet? And
No, I'm using like a pen and paper.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay,
I like to, so I like in my meetings, etc. I'm still the person that uses notebook. I like to write because I think it's part of my learning process. And my to-do list is something that I do every day when I arrive in my notebook. And I've done several notebooks already in my life. And then I do like the date and everything that pops in my mind that I need to do. And then I go back to the list and I number it from 1 to 10. And I do this every day. And I like the thing of scratching, Done.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say much about that. I have a whiteboard. So, I mean, I still have other tools too, but I can't give up the whiteboard in my workspace.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just
Everyone has their specific stuff.
Do you have a health and wellness tool or product that you're using, like a Fitbit or something?
Yes. I'm very into health and exercise. So I use Apple Watch to train because I do several sports. And there's an app called Aptive that has like training for everything that you can imagine, like from stair climber to, I don't know, Muay Thai. So they have, it's an American app. They have like different like lessons, right, within the app. And it can be like beat based with their music, or you can use your own music. So it's something that I use a lot. It's like if I'm in a treadmill or if I want to lift weights, but I don't have a professor or anything like that. I just put it in the app and I use it.
Well, now I got to ask, what are the sports?
Okay. I cycle, I run, I lift weights, I do yoga. It depends.
Okay, so there's a triathlon in the future. I mean, you got the biking and running down.
Everyone says that, but no, like I'm not I can wake up one day and run literally 25 kilometers, easy. But I've done like once in my life a half marathon, and I've never done a marathon, and I couldn't care less about my pace. It's for my head, for my mind. So everyone's like, Julia, you have to do a triathlon or you have to do this specific race. I'm like, why am I going to wake up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday to run? No, I can run at noon when I wake up. But I love sleeping. This is something very specific. So I love sleeping. I sleep a lot. So even more so, I sleep a lot during the weekends because during the week I can't. So it's no sense in my mind. So not the triathlon person.
So if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice about this industry, what would it be?
Learn to code. At least a bit. I think, so I'm 34. I think that if I was starting like college now, even if it were economics, I would like focus on more than Excel, like learning to code, because I think that I did a couple of like Python courses, but I don't code at all. But I think it's interesting for your train of thought and to organize how you're thinking, like the logic of it.
Very cool. That ends the random questions. See, it wasn't so bad.
Easy.
Super easy. So this is the time of the podcast. If there's anything that you'd like to shout out, your blog, any of that kind of stuff, anything you want to promote, this is the time to do.
This is the time. All right. So my newsletter is something that if you listened until now, you can tell that I really like. So I would encourage everyone to subscribe. It's juliadeluca.substack.com. I'm also very active in LinkedIn and in Instagram. So follow me on either social media or both. And if you have any questions or want to reach out, I'm very responsive.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
You can find information about the Candid Capital Podcast on the website, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Episodes can be found on Spotify and other podcast platforms. A quick reminder that this is infotainment and is not intended to be professional advice, malicious, or hateful. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not represent those of employers, partners, and their subsequent connected private and public associations or organizations.
We canned it, I hope you understand it. Your business growth, we planned it, yeah. This ain't for sure, we stamped it, yeah. No FOMO, everyone come join, no solo. This all factual, from me to you, this Candid Capital.